This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and before we jump into the rugby, I just want to have a quick chat to both Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie about the decision that Rassie Erasmus made last week to announce his team to the team for the second Test match, and whether or not that would have had any impact on the way that the South Africans played last week. Because in my years of being involved in teams, the very best ones have stayed where their feet are. They don't get too far ahead of themselves. So what sort of impact would it have had to speak to the whole squad to let them know that this was the team for week one, this was the team for week two, and indeed, is that part of having to manage such a big squad to keep people happy? Because another thing that Rassie Erasmus said this week was it is very hard to manage big squads when you've got people. So Ewen McKenzie, what are your thoughts about that, announcing a team a week in advance?
I'm sure he's done that plenty of times before. He's probably did that through the Italian series and whatever, so I don't think that that's necessarily unusual. And it's obvious, for me, it's the obvious way to manage the squad expectation. So if they know they've got to play next week, it gives them something to focus on. If you're not in the 23, well, then you've got something to do during the week. You can start doing analysis and whatever, work on your line-out strategy, depending on how many players there are involved that know they're playing the following week and aren't playing that week. It gives them a focus, so it just keeps everyone busy. So I'm sort of not surprised. But obviously it's at the mercy of injuries and other things, of which there seems to be a lot. And this HIA now kicks in now, so people drop out through that. So you're never going to get change. But I would say he's done it many times before.
So you wouldn't be worried that it sets off expectations, sets off behaviours, people start thinking about what's happening
I think
in week two?
He's got a very deep squad. I don't know that that's something I would have ever thought of doing. In my head, I had a plan in my head. I might think about doing that, but I'd obviously wait and see how the performance unfolds. So you might have an idea about reintroducing someone, particularly coming back from injury or something like that, but I don't know that I'd nominate a 15 for the following week. He's got a bit of an embarrassment of riches in a way, so maybe that's where he's ended up after a few years of large squad management. Most of us don't have that. But, I was looking at his team and, he's probably got 50% of his players are playing overseas. So he's bringing them back in. So it's a lot for him to manage in terms of getting the cohesion quickly. You've got players coming and going. There's a core of Bulls players, but other than that, a lot of players from overseas coming in. So I would have thought that you'd be going week to week, but he clearly has other ideas and he's smarter than me. He's coaching, I'm not.
What about you, Eddie Jones? You actually did have depth problems at times over in England as well, where you did have lots of players who were vying for selection. Have you ever done a similar thing?
Well, I think you always do it, mate. But sometimes you announce and sometimes you don't. South Africa's winning at, 80%? They've been the most dominant team in the world. We were praising his selection before the game. And I don't think it's unusual given his situation where they carry a squad, I believe, of 42 all the time. So I think he's just made it clear. And from what I hear, they prioritised the test at Cape Town, and they thought they could win with the squad they had for the first test, which was obviously proven wrong. And that that can happen. That level of rugby, anyone can win one game of rugby. They play that test in Johannesburg 10 times and South Africa might win it 7 of those times, So I wouldn't read into it too much, mate.
Okay. But so you say they're prioritising the second test in Cape Town. Why would you do that?
Well, they thought Australia would be stronger in the second test at Cape Town, and Australia traditionally play well at Cape Town. I think the history shows they've always played well there. And, in the old days at Newlands, the crowd used to be more receptive to the Australians than other crowds tended to be. And the new stadium at Greenpoint or Sea Point, I can't remember the exact name of it, will have again, quite a good atmosphere there. And they felt Australia would be stronger in that second test, and they generally are at sea level.
Okay, Ewen McKenzie, you've seen the teams selected, 10 changes to the Boks side. Certainly you were anticipating some of the changes in terms of Pollard and LaRue when we chatted earlier in the week. But sitting back now, looking at that South African side, what do you see?
Well, I see, obviously, disappointment in their first up performance. So you've seen some key players head to the bench, Etzebeth being one. But there's still a core in the forward pack that's the same. That obviously some injuries that force some changes as well, but still a pretty strong side and a pretty experienced side. I'm not surprised by the Alaman coming back in the centres. Willie LaRue I've spoken before about he's the eyes and ears at the back. And he'll chime in and play as a playmaker if necessary. But I think they'll narrow their tactics a little bit back to the basics. I think that Eddie said that the other day. They'll start going back to what they're really good at, and then see what happens after that. But I'm I'm surprised by maybe one of the front row change. Maybe I thought the scrum was all right, and they'll only get better. But back row, they got some experienced players coming in. I'm not too familiar with them, so I don't know about the forwards, whether they've changed much there, but they've certainly got some impact coming off the bench. And then, the back line's reasonably similar. I think it'll be stronger, the back line. So.
Your views, Eddie Jones, on the side that Rassie Erasmus has selected?
Well, I think if you look at the starting 30 from last week, I think 7 are out with injury. So that's nearly 25% of the total players out through injury. You then start to think, are we looking after the players well enough? Which I think is a constant theme in rugby where, the rugby year has become a 12-month calendar in a lot of ways. And particularly for the South African players who play in Japan, they basically play a full 12 months now. So there's that part of it. The second part, I think, is that, the Springboks are going through some sort of a transitional period, where they've had 2 successful World Cups and, by the fact they've had 2 successful World Cups, they've had players at the right age to win. And those players now, by the fact that they've been up for 8 years, are starting to get older. So, they need to be thinking about how you replace those players. And I think Rassie's spoken about that in a way. He talks about building depth, but they are rebuilding to an extent. And, and this team's gone back to the old formula. Delundy comes back, Willie LaRue comes back, Pollard. Jean-Luc Dupree, Pollard, he's a big number 8, big physical number 8. They've gone back to a better calling lock, which has always been a traditional part of the Springbok setup. So, and sometimes when you're rebuilding, you got to go back to the past to help you rebuild again. And losing that test would have hurt them. They've gone back to a more tried and true combination that he thinks can do the job in Cape Town.
Eddie talks about you've got a squad that's been very successful over a long period of time, and it reminds me of 95. We went to the World Cup and, we came up short, and we were the same. As much as in your head you think you're there and whatever, but everyone's carrying injuries and long things that were not just niggles, but things that you carry and you get away with it as you get there. But ultimately that was a bridge too far. And I was looking at they're bringing in, they've brought guys into the squad, but they're all well into their 30s, some of those guys, especially up front. So they've got a big squad, but they've got a lot of older guys too, So I don't know where the 20-year-old or the young 20 forwards are. Maybe they're in there somewhere and I'm not noticing, but it's a catch-22. You're relying on the old firm to come back in and sort of right the ship, but that's the old firm still, when it's about trying to regenerate and not get caught out like we did in 95, and you come up a bit short because you're a bit too old and a bit too fragile.
So the Australian side, your thoughts on the team that Joe Schmidt has selected? Clearly Wilson is out injured. I can't quite work out what's wrong with him, but
I think he did. No, he did his
He ran
knee.
too fast, mate.
Yeah, you can
Ran
see,
too fast.
You can see when he pulled up, he's obviously, I'd say there's a cruciate problem. He pulled up and then he suddenly he stuttered. And you see that in other sports where a lot of the injuries happen and no one's in contact with you, right? He's literally pulling up, big heavy weight, slowing up really quickly because the dead ball line's really close. And so I think he's damaged his cruciate. So I'm half expecting to hear about that sooner rather than later. But, having Valentini coming in, geez, that's a good replacement. I mean, that's the back row as it is now is probably my favourite back row going into this test. I'll be interested to see how it goes. New captain. And I guess Toole on the wings probably the only real surprise in terms of changes. But is that a surprise? I don't know.
Would you have picked someone like Corey Toole?
I don't know enough about it. He's obviously very quick and he's certainly a very effective player in attack. But this game, I think, with Pollard at 10, there's going to be some high ball action, I'd think, and so it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. But he can certainly sniff an opportunity, and he can finish anything off. There's no doubt about that. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes. But they've been holding off on. He's been in the squad for 12 months, and they've been holding off, and suddenly bang his debut now in Cape Town, which is a tough start. Like the crowd's right on top of you, good luck to him. I think he's certainly. He can't do much more in terms of what he's done to get to where he is. So hopefully he can take the next step.
And your thoughts, Eddie, when you saw the Australian team selected for the match? Not too many surprises there, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, no, pretty straightforward, mate. The only one would be, Toole's got plenty of courage. He's got plenty of pace. He goes into the contest hard. He's probably had issues on the other side of the ball. More so than his attacking game. And, Robertson starting for Bell, obviously they think they get more value from Bell finishing than he does from starting. Robinson's a good, solid scrummage, a good, tough player. He does his job.
Pemby, I meant to say on Robertson, I had a look because I thought, because obviously it was a tight head and everyone's judged him on being tight head, but he's played 70% of his representative career as a loose head. So he's a more experienced loose head player than he is a tight head. So when they played him at tight head, in my mind, he was out of position. He did start his career there, but he's not a heavyweight guy. And I think he's a very good footballer. So I think, and I don't know, clearly they like Bell as a finisher. I thought he was really good last week, and I would have thought this might have been a chance to start, but clearly they like to finish with him, and hopefully, Robertson will give a good account of himself, and I think he's probably in his preferred position.
How difficult will it be for the Australians, given the injuries that they've had, but to maintain that high level of performance? Second test against the Lions was a good performance. Third test was a good performance. Again, last week they recovered after a pretty scratchy state, but they played again, won the game. How difficult is it to maintain that type of performance when, the squad is starting to thin out in terms of its depth, Ewen McKenzie?
Well, confidence is a wonderful thing. So they've obviously worked their way through some difficult situations in recent times and come up with some pretty, wins with great merit. Things that will be talked about for a long time. So that's a really good starting point to be able to keep going. And again, you look back into the periods of time. I know when I came into the Wallaby team in 1990, we were starting to win a few games, but guys like Tony Daly and Phil Kearns and those guys, they came in 89, and it's not, it's 3 years later before you start to win consistently. You get your first win against the All Blacks in 90, and then you win a series in the year after, and that's how it works. So they're at that sort of point where they can potentially change and head in that direction, where they start winning more than not against the really good teams. But it's going to be a rough period going forward with depth. But, they go into this game with great confidence. The only thing that'll be worrying them, I guess, is that first 18 minutes. Whether they'll expect that, so they'll prepare for that, and whether they can finish strong like they did. I mean, they couldn't finish stronger. whether that'll happen again or whether the Springboks will nail some of the missed opportunities they had in the first test, particularly in the first half.
What about for you, Eddie? How do you sort of look at these types of situations where there is that building confidence, there is that building momentum? How do you continue it? How do you continue to build that belief that Joe Schmidt spoke about during the week?
Well, I think, one of the things, if you remember back to the first test against the Lions, Joe congratulated the team at the end for the ability to stay in the contest. And he said 12 months ago they couldn't do that. And I think that's the big development of the team, being able to stay in the contest. And as Ewen said, that, they're in about their, for some players it's their third year of international rugby. For others it's their second year. So they're starting to develop or have that experience at test level. And you only get better as a test player by playing tests and high-level tests. So they're starting to accumulate that hardness, that toughness to stay in the contest. They've got some good role models there. We've spoken about Skelton a lot. He's certainly leading that way. Slipper's been good for him, mate, been outstanding for him. And White's come back into the team rejuvenated and done a really good job. And then you've got a few of those young guys who are really lighting up in the test arena, like Jorgensen and Suwali. Tom Wright's had his moments. So they're starting to accumulate a team that has a basis of being a good team. But the big test is to keep doing it, And this week they know the examination that's going to come. It's going to be probably an old-fashioned South African around the corner, pollard high balls. It'll be raining. So they know what's coming and they'll prepare for it. They won't be, I don't think they'll be seduced by their success at all, but they'll know it'll be a good, tough game, and they would have battened down the hatches this week and got ready for it.
So James Doleman from New Zealand is the referee. What should we expect from him, Eddie Jones, and what sort of influence might he have on the contest?
Yeah, we've had him a bit. He's a good young referee. He's from Otago. So they're always a good breed of people from down there, good, tough rugby people. He tends to favour the contest a bit more. And again, if you look at the teams, you'd think that it advantaged Australia a bit, who are going to be a bit stronger over the ball than South Africa, because South Africa's only really got one real jackler in Van Staden. And they disadvantaged last week when he went off with the HIA. Marks does his bit over the ball. But Australia's probably got an advantage in that area, so he penalises. He doesn't mind giving a jackal penalty early in the game, so it could advantage Australia.
Ewen McKenzie, your thoughts on James Doleman?
Yeah, well, he's not. He's 14 Test matches. I think he's done a few, but I had a look at his stats, and he's reffed Australia 5 times for. Australia's won 4, so that's encouraging, and he's only done South Africa once. So, but then I looked at the super stats, and the Waratahs are 0 and 6. So I'm not quite sure. But the thing about all the score lines, when you look at the games he's refereed, a lot of high scoring games, like a lot of 30 to 40 type score lines. I'm not sure it's going to be that down there, but. Even in a high-scoring game, they're still tight. A lot of tight games, like tight scores, 3-4 points in it here and there. So I think, everyone's going to get their chance. And I suspect that I'm not saying he's engineering that, but he doesn't. I guess it goes back to what he's saying. He doesn't mind the contest and whatever. So I think the game will ebb and flow, and it could be tight. Discipline again.
But what are you suggesting, though, that the way that he will referee, that when you talk about allowing the contest, he will judge it to be what?
Well, he's going to allow people to compete for the ball, and he'll reward people for competing for the ball. And I think, I've watching the Lions series and then going straight into that test last week, the point of difference for me at the moment is Australia's is far more, and we'll see as this championship rolls out. But Australia's got a more sort of natural or instinctive players that don't mind getting over the ball for a decent amount of time to be able to get the contest. And we saw it last week. We saw it last week with obviously McReight and Hooper, and we've seen it across the park. So that's a product, I think, out of the Super Rugby scenario, and I think the All Blacks are the same. They've got contesters or jacklers for the ball across the team, whereas I don't see it. I mean, Eddie just talked about Van Stad. South Africa can nominate one player, maybe two with marks. Definitely two with marks, but they're not inclined, and that probably points to the competitions they play in where they don't stay over the ball. The focus is about having an initial tackle, but then quickly getting out. And you saw it in the Lions; they were dynamite at getting out of that tackle situation and getting back in the defensive line for the next tackle. So they were trying to get their turnovers through their tackling, whereas Australia was generating turnovers through the contest of the ball, so picking the opportunity and being strong over the ball and getting rewarded by the Kiwi refs will reward that. So Doleman will do the same. And South Africa, who play in the Northern Hemisphere competitions, they don't seem – they've got a couple of guys, but they're not on the field, but it's not across the team. It might have been in the past when we all played in the same competitions, but I think that's been for me, it's a subtle but a noticeable change about the attitude of the ruck and the technical skill of the ruck about where the focus is, or is it about getting back on the defensive line and having numbers on their feet? So,
Eddie Jones, your analysis of Ewen McKenzie's analysis.
Pretty good, mate. The only thing I think we've forgotten about is Balande, who can get over the ball, he's hard over the ball. And he'll improve their wider breakdown skills. I think, South Africa last week, when they shifted the ball wide, the inside centre has such a pivotal role in that wide breakdown. And Delande's got great breakdown skills. He can be strong over the ball, and he's good in his cleaning out. He's got a huge work rate, and that's why he's like a 90 capper for a South African side that's won 2 World Cups.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah. And that's their best centre combination, has been for some time now. So I think they're very complementary. I think Creel was trying to do a lot last week, but, I don't think the synergy was there. That they'll be right back in form as a pairing in attack and defence.
All right, crystal ball time, gentlemen. Ewen McKenzie, to you first. What sort of game are we going to see? Obviously, you're talking about the return to a more traditional approach, but what sort of margin might there be, and who ends on top?
The traditional approach was there last week, as I said. They put up 4 or 5 high balls in the first 18 minutes, and we dropped all of them. So we dropped 4 out of 5. So they'll be buoyed by that, and they'll be looking for that opportunity. So in a way, it was there, but then they played on from that, and then they went away from that. So I think that'll be more consistent. Pollard will stick to the knitting much better. I think LaRue's there to try and, if there's any opportunity for width in the game, he'll call that from the back. But otherwise, Pollard will keep the ball in front of the forwards, and that's how I think it'll go for a while. And then they'll assess the game in the second half when they've got the bench comes on. They've got 6 forwards coming in the game. They can probably mix it up, because I'm sure in the end they want to be a little bit more expansive, but I think that they'll try and earn that right for a bit longer. They'll want to nail the game. So that's how they'll think. Australia, they're really good at staying in the contest. They've got a couple of changes, but I think they'll actually be stronger. So I think it's going to be a close game. That's my call. I mean, the bookies are saying it's a close game where the odds are important. They got it wrong last week, so the bookies have got it very close. I don't know what they are now, but it's pretty close. So I'm thinking, Australia could pull this off. I actually think that South Africa would be worried about that, because if Australia wins, that's a major. I mean, there's already been a shake-up in the world rankings as a result of last week. So I'm hoping Australia can get there, even if 1 point's enough.
Eddie Jones, your thoughts?
Well, apparently there could be a bit of rain, and that new pitch at Sea Point has been problematic for a long time because of the angle of the roof, so it shifts around a bit. So I think it'll be a pretty slow type game with the referee favouring the contest. Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much in it, mate. I think it'll be a really tight game. It'll be a penalty goal between the two teams. So who gets the penalty at the end?
All right.
Who referees the referee better? Can Creel referee the referee better than than McReight. That's a big part of it, particularly at that ground. Who can referee the referee?
I'm
Obviously,
keen,
they had to.
I'm keen to see how McReight goes as a captain. I've been a big.
Yeah.
I think he's been our best 7 for 3 years now, and I think the last couple of months post injury he was a bit quiet, but on the whole, I think he's been one of the first picked in the team. So, not surprised to see him running out there as captain. He's done it before, and I'll be interested to see how he goes as a leader on the field. But he led from the front last week, and he's starting to find his form from earlier in the year. But I think he's been one of our best performed players. So him and Valentini and Hooper, I think that's a really good back row for this game.
How hard is it, though, to acquire those captaincy skills and that management of the referee? You have someone like a Skelton there who's an experienced captain, been there before, taken Australia to a World Cup. Might that have been a better option in this case, Eddie Jones, or are you happy that Fraser McReight gets the opportunity?
Well, I think, they're moving the team on. I think it's a really good decision. I think, as Ewen said, he's really led by the front. I thought he was quiet in the first Lions Test, but since then I think he's been in if you pick the top 5 Australian players for each Test, he's in them. He'd be the first 5 pick for this Test, he'd be in it. He's a young guy. It's a youngish team coming through. Probably suits the mentality of the team to have someone like him in there. But, the skills he's got to accumulate to be a good captain. Because you just think of the game now, how big an influence the captain can have on the referee. We're basically, in NRL, they've got one captain's challenge. We've got a captain's challenge every TMO now. They can virtually challenge. So the way you conduct yourself with the referee is so important. I know South Africa paid a lot of attention to that, and probably still do. So that'll be a key area. And we saw the influence when Itoje went off in the third Test, how the Lions seemed to be a little bit leaderless with all the great players they had. So it's we can't expect him just to walk up to the crease and be the best batsman. It's going to take time.
Yeah, I agree. And you've got to manage your own team as well. Don't forget, you've got people like Nick Wright, who doesn't mind a chat. You've got to manage him. You've got to manage Skelton, who doesn't mind being a bit boisterous, in and around the whistle. So there's lots of things you've got to manage. You got to keep looking over your shoulder to make sure the troops are doing the right thing at the right time. So I personally think, and I don't know the guy, but I think he'd be really highly respected by his teammates. So that's a really good starting point. His teammates respect what he says, and he hasn't been in. He's been in a leadership position in the 21s, but the 20s, but under 20s. But I think that it's the right time for him to come to the fore, and really, hopefully, it goes really well. I think hopefully it really makes him an even a better player. I've been really impressed with his form over the last 3 years.
Eddie Jones, we do have to let you get back to your day job, coaching Japan. You have many responsibilities up there. But before you go, we're having a bit of a chat this morning about a new book that you've come across called Attack, 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 by a couple of South African coaches, a father-son combination. Tell us about the book and why you've been so impressed by it.
I got it sent to me. It's by Alan Zonda and A.B. Zonda. And, the father was one of those Western Province. Western Province were always the most attacking team in South Africa, and they like to play side to side, and they always had an attack approach. And he's been a long-time coach. His son's done well in various teams. I think it's at Lyon. And it's just a really well-written book, looking at the history of attack. And for anyone who, is interested in coaching or interested in finding out about rugby, I've read it this morning, and it's a good read, and it's worth having a read. So it's called Attack, 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 Create Chaos. How to play fast, creative, exciting rugby.
That's how you're reading that while you're on the bicycle this morning on level 2. Is that right? 5 a.m. in the morning.
That's right, mate. No, level 1 now, mate.
Mate, nothing changes. That's 20 years of that. More than that. Sitting there, battling away.
Give us one or two things though that you took from the book where you thought, that's a good thought. Other coaches need to be thinking about that.
Well, the thing that struck me was that, rugby used to be an evasion game. Like when we played the game, you had 8 forwards at every ruck, so there was plenty of space to evade people. And now it's become such a collision game because there's no space. There's virtually no space. Yeah, we've commented on how Australia's played. One of the reasons Australia's been successful is they've played virtually half-pitch rugby, and it's been impossible for the opposition to get the ball off them because they've got 12 attackers to their 10 defenders. But then they've been able to have the subtle skills of Skelton being able to a little step and get his head and shoulders through, some short passing down the short side. So they found a way to be creative and found a way to create momentum. And I think, in today's game, you've got to be thinking all the time, how can you create space? Because it's so hard to find space now.
Okay, well, that's a good recommendation, and I did actually see if I could find it on Amazon, and I couldn't. So I went actually and looked it up, and if you are interested in Eddie Jones' book club, it's you can buy it at az-rugby.com. So that's az-rugby.com. So, Eddie Jones, thank you for joining us once again. Ewen McKenzie's going to stick around, and we're going to talk about All Blacks and Argentina, the second test match. We're going to talk about the beginning of the Women's World Cup. But look forward to catching up with you Monday, Eddie Jones, as we wrap up from a very big weekend. So a big thanks to you for coming along once again. So we'll be back with Eddie Jones on Monday, which is great. So thanks. And that came through this morning, hot off the press. He was saying we want to talk about, because obviously it's clearly a very good book. So put together by the Zonda family there, father and son. So a good read recommended by Eddie Jones. So Ewen McKenzie, we're moving on now to the test match between the All Blacks and Argentina. For mine, I was a bit disappointed last week in Argentina. Córdoba, massive crowd, big build-up, obviously the big success off beating the Lions, really looking for that, signs of Argentina being able to step up. But by half-time, it was 31-10. The game was pretty well gone. I was just a bit disappointed that we didn't see that, further improvement that would suggest to us that Argentina is really going to become a genuine contender in 2027. But how did you read the game?
Well, Argentina have been pretty consistent over the last 4, 5, 6 years. They've been right at the top end and a difficult team to beat. Last week, it was another loss. And if you think about it, if you're an Argentinian fan in Argentina, I think that's 3 in a row that they've watched 3 in a row losing games. So it's difficult from a fan point of view in terms of engagement. But then again, they're playing the All Blacks. It's never an easy game. Doesn't matter what's going on. So they've had a little bit of change, and I see that the team they've picked this week, he hasn't changed much. I think he brought in a winger and swapped one winger to the other side, and he's brought in he swapped one of the back rowers to the bench. So he's sticking with his side and hoping for better. And the All Blacks, who I don't think the All Blacks would have been, over the moon with their performance either. They're rebuilding, but they've done the same. They've only made a couple of changes, so they're bringing some guys in through the bench, and one, they're bringing a new guy into number 8. So I'm interested to see what that brings, because Simon Parker is his name, is coming in number 8 from the Chiefs. He's a relatively inexperienced player. He's only played like 30-odd games at provincial level, but he's a big unit, they say. So I'll be interested to see how they intend to use him in the back row. So Sevilla going to the side, and Vi still a good back row, I think. So I'm interested in that just from a technical point of view, but still got a good forward pack. So it'll be interesting to see who can improve much in a week. They're playing in Buenos Aires, 50,000 crowd. Big open stadium, no roof, just big stands, no roof. So it'll feel a bit different. So, I don't know. As I said, it was all was trench warfare last week, so hopefully it's a little bit more. There's a little bit more enterprise on show this week. But that's just from a fan point of view. In the end, both teams just want to have a win.
Yeah. Cody Taylor plays his 100th Test match. Great player for the All Blacks over many years. How important are these sort of milestone fixtures where you do have, such a revered player, such a respected player inside the All Blacks team and with All Black fans and indeed with rugby fans around the world? What sort of impact does it have that, do we want to get a win for Cody? Does that have any sort of impact on the build-up? Does it have any impact on the conversations during the week? How is it that that may or may not contribute to the All Black performance this weekend?
Broadly speaking, those sort of the farewell games and the sort of milestone games often turn to custard. That's my sort of experience. So, yes, it's like it ends up, and the media types like yourself, they want to make a big deal out of it during the week, so it interrupts the preparation. But it's important to acknowledge, we acknowledge post-game, the achievement, and that generally happens. There's always a cap or some sort of a presentation or something like that. So it's not like it's forgotten, but they get to run out first, and I think it can be a danger. It can be a distraction. I don't think the All Blacks are allowed to be. I don't think, knowing him and how he's presented himself, I don't think that he'll allow that to be a distraction. I think they'll just get on with it, and then they'll talk about it post game. So, but I've seen many of the farewell games. In fact, we saw it. I mean, it worked out well for Nick White, although he wasn't really he didn't actually retire. He was retiring, but he didn't. So it wasn't quite a farewell game. But I've seen many in the past that just the souffle doesn't rise. So Anyway, it's but a great achievement. Great achievement. It's been a really good player.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, wonderful player over many years. But probably some of the other criticism that came out of New Zealand of their own side last week, I think, clunky. They didn't feel that they attacked particularly well. There was some criticism of Proctor in the centres. What was your assessment of the way they organised their attack?
I think if you start at 9, they've got a few injuries there. So, and there's got some real X factor guys who aren't available, and that's been dogging the team now for 2 years, or at least last year as well. So they haven't been able to get settled on that side of it. 10 has been a problem. He's sticking with Barrett at the moment. He's obviously played McKenzie there a lot in the past, so that's been they haven't been able to settle that. And then the centre, Geordie Barrett, I think I like him at 12. 13, they've always got they've always had different players have been available they've relied on, but they haven't really been able to settle on that 13 position. And that's always been you look back at their teams, they've always had a strong organising guy, a good voice out there that's always sort of managed the back line. And I feel like with the changes and things like that, they probably haven't been able to settle in that role. They have someone there. It's not that person's there just trying to stay in the team rather than trying to manage and organise the back line. So after that, Ioane, Reece, Will Jordan, I mean, they're all great players. They can all make something happen. So it's a bit clunky there because it's a different combination. So they're sort of sticking. They haven't really changed anything. So hopefully we'll get a better another week's training. There'll be a better outcome there. We'll see what that looks like. But they've changed the bench a little bit, so maybe some impact there. But I think at this point in time of the championship that they'll just be happy to be winning away, and they'll be hoping they're going to build. And that's just how it is. It's no different to South Africa have lost. No one expected that, but they did. That's how rugby works, and so. The All Blacks at this point just be happy to notching up wins, and then that keeps the base generally happy. They don't tolerate losing too well. They'll just build from there. So I think they'll be better this week.
And Argentina, clearly you would expect that there will be an improvement off the back of last week. Thomas Albanese at fly half looks a promising player, and the more he plays, the better he looks.
Yep, I think that's the case. Eddie made the comment about how narrow they played. They played very narrow last week, whether that's the same tactic, and I think they've got a bit more skill than that. So by playing narrow, we didn't really see some of the flair. So maybe they'll do a little bit more in terms of expressing themselves, because that, in a way, suits them. I mean, I think they've been quite a talented team for some time, and they can certainly sniff out opportunities. So that might get a bit more engagement, but they'll you would assume that they're going to improve too, like everyone else. So everyone's going to. South Africa will be hoping to get better. Australia will certainly want to be better than they were in the first 18 minutes. So that's just where you are in the championship. Just those teams are coming in off a different preparation. Not as hard as the Lions. So Australia probably had the best preparation coming. All the others are coming off different. I mean, Free had the France series, but even then there wasn't all the key players there. So they're all coming a bit short. So you assume that they're all going to improve. I expect a tight game there as well.
Yeah. And Buenos Aires, the playing there, have you played and coached there? You have?
I haven't. Yes, but not at that stadium. So they've got a bunch of different stadiums. So it's a big town. They'll be training at one of the country clubs and the polo club or whatever it is. So they'll have a good preparation, and it's a nice town. There'll be a loud crowd. As I said, there's no looking at it. I don't think there's any roof. I don't think there's any roofs over the actual seating. So that won't trap some of the noise. So it'll feel a little bit more open. But it'll just be a tough occasion. They always are. I mean, the one thing is we know that Argentina can beat the All Blacks because they've done it more than anyone else, I think, in recent years. So that's something.
Something to look forward to there. And away from the field, a couple of things caught my attention this week on the content side of it. The All Blacks, and I'd encourage people to go and have a look at this great piece that was put together by the All Blacks. There was a visit by a couple of the team members, including the coach, Scott Robertson, and they went to a jail, Penitentiary 28 in Buenos Aires. And back in 2009, an Argentinian lawyer started the Spartans Rugby Club inside this particular jail. And so the All Blacks had the opportunity to go and visit with the players and to inspect the facilities inside the barbed wire. And it's just a really powerful piece of content created there by the All Blacks. And this particular program, since it's been running, the recidivism has dropped from something like 65% to 5% for people who have joined and participated as part of the rugby team there. And again, we talk about rugby changing lives, and this is a great example of that. So I'd encourage people to go and have a look at that. Some lovely filmmaking. So well done to the All Blacks on that. And it gives you that sense of, rugby's depth and its coverage. The fact that the New Zealand team can go there and to visit that place and just to see that the impact that the game is having. So that was a great piece of content. And the second bit of content that I saw on YouTube was by the Supersport team, and it was covering a fan visit by the Springboks to an open training session. And the Springboks have moved to a different place in the hearts and minds of the South African people. And Eddie Jones alluded to it earlier, that back in the day, and you would remember this, Ewen McKenzie, that when Australian teams, certainly with the Brumbies and the Wallabies, my experience was that when we played in that part of the world, we had a pretty good, the Cape Town crowd often were very supportive of the Australians and very supportive, I know in my experience there, of the Brumbies. But Rassie Erasmus, the success of the team over the years, the way that the team has come to represent South Africa, but to see the thousands and thousands, I think there was something like 5,000 people at this open training session, and just to see the passion that the South Africans have for their team. Again, another really, really powerful piece of content. So, Ewen, observing it from afar, what's your observation of the way that the Springbok team now sits in the realm of the South African psyche and the identity of the country? They seem to have nearly really assumed this vital part of the identity of South Africa.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, having been there in '92, you look at the journey since then. It's been it's become a far more cohesive and inclusive sport, and you can actually probably add Argentina into this, because in the end, the sports in both countries were probably, and as it was back in the day, probably in Australia as well. Coming out of private schools and the elite sort of, the clubs are all elite sort of clubs. And so now that they've been able to transition that, and you're talking about the jail experience in Argentina, try and make the sport more recognisable and more available to everyone. And therefore that by default makes it more inclusive, because you've got everyone able to play and getting interested and watching and then becoming fans. And so the last time I was there, looking Super Rugby and even the Test team, you only have to look at the crowd to see the change. There's been a lot of change there and a lot of enthusiasm. They are very enthusiastic crowds in both countries. And so I think it's been a journey. Argentina's probably a bit simpler, but in South Africa it's been complicated politically and otherwise, but they just persisted with it, and everyone's done their bit at each level. And now it's about having idols. And there's a bunch of players. Rassie's done one thing. He's got a big squad, but he's got a big squad of players that everyone knows and recognises. And so that's a powerful thing, because you can deploy those well-known people into all sorts of situations, and you can get interest, you can get a crowd, you can get kids high-fiving and getting an autograph and all those sorts of things. You need to have those idols available, and they've developed a whole heap of them, and that's working really well for South Africa. Even though some of their players are playing offshore, they're still able to deploy them in a way that is generating enthusiasm and national pride.
And I think the next opportunity, just working off that theme of enthusiasm, that I want to point out, and it's the content being created by the England women's team ahead of the World Cup that begins in Sunderland on England time, 7:30 p.m. on Friday night at the Stadium of Light. For those of you in Australia, that's 4:30 a.m. in the morning. You're going to have to get up. But just the sheer joy and personality that's coming through this English women's team. They're under an enormous amount of pressure and expectation, but they're telling great stories. They're opening themselves up. They're creating great content. And I've even seen some great content from the Wallaroos, the Australian team. More imagination, more creativity. World Rugby has put content creators in each of the teams, so we're going to be able to see more role models, more heroes created. But for mine, Ewen McKenzie, at the moment, the women are really showing the men the way, that there is the opportunity to be a personality and to be part of a team. Whereas traditionally in the men's game, there's that, keep your head down, don't say too much, no one's bigger than the team. But obviously the game is now realising that we have to build stars, and we have stars. We've got, Joseph Akuso Suoli'i, he is an absolute rock star. Pollock, and again, you can go through all of the countries and there's plenty of people there. And I noticed that Steve Borthwick, the England coach, now talking about the need to develop stars, and Brett Robinson and Alan Gilpin, and everyone's talking about it. So what's your observation there about how the men's game can perhaps follow the lead of the women's game, where they're more accessible, they're more engaged with the fans, and they are showing more of their authentic selves, which allows people to get to know them and, to create more engagement, more passion and those other things. So what are your thoughts on this prickly issue of developing stars in a traditional team game?
I don't think it's a prickly issue. I think it's a traditional issue. But I was relaxed about this back in 2011. When Queensland won the Super title, if you wind the clock back a couple of years, you're in a situation where and I said it before, you've got to create heroes, you've got to create people, you've got to create occasions where fans can engage with the players. So when you're in a provincial environment, you might have a couple of test players that kids might recognise, but you have to create other personalities. And they don't have to be necessarily the best player. They're just different. So I'll give you the Fainga twins that were playing at the Reds. The kids loved guys like them. And then Digby Ioane and Rod Davies and these sort of guys that they weren't like 50 test gamers. They're just guys that had personalities. So you had to allow them to project their personality, create environments, create the stage for them to be able to do that. And then the kids got interested in them, followed them. And I think it's even more now as social media has come even further, that you're going to find those people or stumble across them. Now, I've already stumbled across, video clips of the England women's team. I saw some girl kicking 50-metre field penalty goals, and I thought that's pretty impressive. And and other clips as well. And you're right about the Australian team as well. So they're projecting themselves out there. I think it's a necessity, particularly in the Australian context, is because it's red hot in the social media spaces. I know Eddie's not so keen on the social media side of it, but I think you have to do it. If you want to get a full stadium, you got to get a bunch of people on the field that the fans can recognise, and we all know it, right? You meet someone, a famous tennis player or something like that, you immediately take an interest. You watch the Formula One series on Netflix, and suddenly you feel like you know the person. So then you're watching, and you want to see how the results went that way. You know the guy, you've seen him on a couple of episodes. You know his personality. He's a fun guy, and so therefore you take an interest. That's how it works. So you got to get that engagement connection, and that gets bums on seats at the stadium. So in that I'm going back to 2011 again. You're able to fill the stadium, whereas these days in Super Rugby, 12,000's a good crowd. In my day, 30,000 average. That's what it was, 30,000 plus. Even the Waratahs prior to that, in the decade prior, we were 30,000, 32,000 plus every week. That was the average. So to get that engagement, you've got to do things. We had tarman, we had people jumping out of helicopters. You've got to do stuff to get the kids engaged. If the kids engaged, they make the parents go to the game too. So suddenly you've got 5 people sitting there watching. And so I think it's essential that you've got to find time in the week for that, and not be, as a coach, not hide them from that. I think the game, to develop the game, you've got to do that that's part of the week for me. So if you've got personalities, you've got to allow them project. But in a managed way, I'm talking about. Not random people in the middle of the night saying stupid things. I'm talking about a managed engagement where you're trying to create heroes and idols and whatever.
But it's one thing to be available, and it's another thing to actually say something interesting. And I don't want to be overtly critical, but the Wallabies this week, I watched every one of their press conferences, and seriously, it's so boring. They don't say anything. There's no personality. There's no stories. There's no.
But that might be nothing to do with the team and more to do with who's creating the content. So
perhaps it could be.
I think it's that. I don't think the players. It's not their remit to come up with the ideas, although some might. It's up to them. It's up to someone to help them manage it, because that's not their expertise. But there's lots of different personalities in there, so you've got to try and play to their strengths. And it doesn't mean, and it might be something quirky. You've mentioned a few quirky things. It might be something quirky like that. Like on the day off, players do different things, so you got to find out what they do, and then someone might do something, not just walk up Table Mountain, but might be something else, So there'll be some golfers there. That's not so exciting, but it might just be guys playing cards. Who knows, But you can have someone having a laugh.
Well, I remember back in the day when we started the Brumbies. Remember Steve Larkham and Joe Roth used to play chess against each other, and we made it. We just kept it as a running gag for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And people bought into it because it was, those two guys play chess. But anyway, I just think we've got to get better at the storytelling across the board. Really encouraging by what I saw there with the All Blacks. Again, South Africa, it just seems to be alive. England, it's good. The quality of the England content that comes out of both the men's and the women's team is really setting the benchmark for the game, and everyone's got to get to that. But there's just personalities galore, I think, that's going to come out of this Women's World Cup. And just before we do wrap it up for the week, your thoughts on the big opening? 40,000 at the Stadium of Light in Sunderland, north of England. Like, what a crackerjack way to start the tournament.
Yeah, amazing. I mean,
isn't it?
Everyone's looking for, by seeing these snippets, you start saying, I've got to watch that and see how it goes, So as an event, even if you're not a rugby person, you watch it because, you got to watch it because there's an event. That's obviously how they're setting it up over there. And, it's hard to look past England as the favourite, but there's massive pressure there. So we'll see. And you're only one yellow card away from oblivion. So we'll see.
And just a reminder to everyone, we do have the Rugby Unity special podcast on a Wednesday with Wallaroo, Bella McKenzie and myself, as we're going to go through and follow all of the action from the 2025 Women's Rugby World Cup. I think it's going to set the game alive. And I think, to your point, Ewen McKenzie, there's going to be so many heroes that are created through this tournament that girls can, and young girls, young boys can see. They can watch the quality of the football. They can see the contest. They can get to know the people through all of the great content that's going to be shared. And I think it's incumbent upon rugby fans around the world that if you do come across it, send it along. A little bit of a like and a share. Engage with that content. Make it happen. Because certainly World Rugby is investing heavily in the content piece. And they released the blueprint for the growth of the women's game. And certainly this investment in personality, the investment in the players, the investment in content is going to be right up there, along with the investment in more competition so they can play against each other.
I think that the difference between then and now is that once you've created the opportunity to engage, it might be through the England team or the Australian team, whatever, then you can obviously, everyone's well serviced now to be able to follow the individual. So it fills in the gaps between tournaments. You can start following your favourite player and see what they're doing. So it encourages them to have, so you can have that engagement all the time. You can see what's going on, and then suddenly there's another tournament. So it fills in the gaps. That's probably one of the problems about the Olympics has had in the past, is that you have these heroes for 2 weeks, and then there's 3 years, and then the heroes again. But what happens in the middle, you don't know, because there hasn't been the technology, but it's certainly there now. So I think that filling in the gaps is an important part.
Yeah. No doubt. So listen, before I let you go, as we do each week, we are featuring the voice, the third voice, the voice of our community. And we've had a couple of very long emails this week. So a big thanks to everyone who wrote through, and we've responded to those, and we'll continue to do so if you do get the message through to us via our email address, which is at info@rugbyunity.com.au. So please, if you'd like to share some of your thoughts with us, we always gratefully receive those. But Joe Elliott on Spotify, Ewen says, great pod, thanks lads. Question, as a Zimbabwean, Zimbabwe recently qualified for the World Cup after 20 years out. For smaller nations, how should they approach the World Cup? ? Zim is never going to get big teams to play them, so what is the best alternative in the years to come outside of the normal Africa Cup games? Ewen McKenzie.
It was difficult because it is, often you get to getting there is the reward. You've obviously got to capitalise on that. I remember back in the day that we trained against some of the African teams and things like that. The teams that were just around the edges to try and encourage them. We had active training sessions against them. So you got to try and make the most of the moment, which is the World Cup. But you got to try and find more opportunities to get that exposure. And I don't know the circumstances in Zimbabwe, but in terms of how you can do that, it's difficult. I get it, but you can't just let being in the World Cup be the end of the achievement. You got to go there with a purpose, and then you got to fight to get a win and whatever. But you got to. It's more for me. The World Cups is the end point. You got to try and do more in the middle. And I don't know what that is, because obviously budgetary, it all gets down to budget, but maybe World Rugby can help in that space. You've got to get more games that are challenging, and you've got to keep seeking to play teams that are theoretically better than you. If I'm Zimbabwe, I'm looking at the world rankings all the time, going, who's ahead of us, who can we play? Let's find out, let's intersect somewhere, let's go and play in Bahrain or something like that. They'll be flying through. Let's try and get a game and try and set up some scenario like that where you make it easy for the game to happen. But you're always playing teams who are better than you theoretically. And that's how you're going to inoculate yourself. And you've got to do that between the World Cups to try and get better and increase your depth and increase your chance of being more consistent. So,
again, that goes to the point about the financial sustainability of the game and Brett Robinson's priority of securing that. So it's one of the big challenges, and certainly we're setting ourselves up to support that here at Rugby Unity to try to find more people in more countries around the world caring more to help secure the future prosperity of the game, because there's always requirements. There's always investment required, because that's a great example, isn't it? Wouldn't it be great to be able to fund a program for Zimbabwe to be able to play those matches that you've just outlined?
And maybe they set up an annual fixture where they're playing some sort of Springbok development team, something like that. So they have something that's logistically maybe a bit more manageable, and so there's a regional aspect to trying to develop the game and develop players. And I'm sure they'd be in for that, So I'm sure that's happened in the past. It's easy just to say these things, but that's where you've got to start. You just got to try and find teams that are theoretically better than you and play them as often as you can. Sounds really simple, but you got to look at the calendar, and you got to look for opportunities and make yourself available for it. You just got to make it work. And I'd be hitting up World Rugby to kick the can a little bit too, kick the tin.
Yeah. But I think that point around regional leadership is a good one as well. Eddie Jones has mentioned on a couple of occasions previously about Argentina's leadership in South America and how they have developed the game. In Paraguay, Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, the Argentinians have taken responsibility. Yes, they've got some funding from World Rugby, but they've taken it upon themselves, knowing that it's in everyone's best interest to develop the game. So anyway, thanks for that question. Another question to you, Ewen McKenzie. It's from Glenn Patton, and it says, do you think the Springboks will end the All Blacks 50-game unbeaten streak at Eden Park in September?
I'll tell you after the weekend. I mean, if they're down 2-0, they'll be pushing the panic button. But as I said, they're quite capable. They've been a very consistent team, and I'm sure in the back of their mind that they've been probably thinking about those sorts of things. And sometimes I feel that Australia's been sort of not the focus, and I think they've now forced themselves to be the focus this week. So let's just see what happens. But they're certainly capable.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Anyway, so we'll obviously dive into that in a little bit more detail. And finally, just a few comments from YouTube. Great show. Love hearing the stories from before there were phones and media to record everything. Cheers. Chris Burke from Spotify says, I listen to many rugby podcasts, and this is definitely the most informative and interesting. And finally, from Scoops Troops Rugby on YouTube, I'm in England, and this is the best rugby podcast out there. So there you go. Thank you very much, Scoops Troops Rugby. We'll continue to try to develop it for you and continue to bring you the insights from two of the greatest minds in the game, Ewen McKenzie and Eddie Jones, and certainly looking forward to understanding what Eddie Jones has got in store for the Pacific Nations Cup and what his expectations are as that tournament begins. So there is so much rugby going on. Don't miss the beginning of the Women's World Cup. And really, everyone, let's get behind the Women's World Cup. Let's really engage in the content. You know, we can see across our channels that certainly our women's content doesn't perform as strongly as our men's stuff. So, again, open-minded, get involved, because I do think we are all going to be stunned by the athletic performances and the personalities of the women who are playing at the elite level. So, Ewen McKenzie, a big thanks to you. Once again, to you, the audience, a big thanks for you coming back. We'll be back on Monday with our review show. But for the moment, please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.